Welcome to the We Are More podcast. My name is Alyssa.
And my name is Bree. We're two sisters passionate about all things faith and feminism.
We believe that Jesus trusted, respected, and encouraged women to teach and preach his word. And apparently that's controversial.
Get comfy.
Hello. Hello. We're coming to you live from not Disney. And also we're not live. So there you go.
I feel barely living.
Earlier today, I said something to my daughter about, like, where's Auntie or whatever. And she goes, I think she's dead. Because that's my response to everything. It's like, probably dead.
Probably dead. Passed away. Deceased.
So that's what happened to you today, even though you didn't know it.
I felt it.
Well, there you go.
I felt it in my knees. I felt it on my nose. I saw
a TikTok.
No, it wasn't a TikTok. It was an Instagram post. And it was like, in reality, I'm 19, but my knees are 74. And my soul is 99. And I was like, wow, she really Frankensteined herself. I feel the same way.
Okay, but speaking of posts about your body, what was that? Bree found this post about, like, if you were born in the 90s, you have a freckle right in this spot on your arm.
Oh my gosh. Everybody who was born in the 90s, take a look at your left arm. At least it's on our left arms.
It's on our left arms.
Kind of like go palm up and look maybe 2 inches from your elbow. Is there a freckle there? Because there's definitely a freckle on mine and Alyssa's.
Yeah.
What is that?
I don't know.
Was it some kind of vaccine? That's a weird spot to get a vaccine.
A strange spot.
But like skin stretches, I guess.
Well, but you're not going to get a freckle, though.
Was that our chickenpox vaccine?
I'm absolutely sure they didn't give it to us on our inner elbow.
Doctors. Can you explain?
All the doctors out there listening.
And I'm not just talking medical doctors. I'm talking, do you have a doctorate in paleontology?
Please explain this to us.
Do you have any answers?
Because TikTok was not helpful in this particular
No,
instance.
it was just like, hey, by the way, look at your arm. It didn't give any other, like, nothing else.
I feel like so many of those things, it's like astrology. You know, when you get your fortune for the day. I don't know what they call it. What do they call it? Your astrological prediction for the day that they put in the newspaper or whatever.
Don't ask me. I am not the right person to ask. I seem like I should be, but I'm not.
But they put things in such a general way. They're like,
yeah,
you're going to meet a human today, and they're going to say words to you. That obviously it's going to apply. But that is wildly specific.
Yeah.
And for it to apply to both of us.
Freckles. Left arms.
Off to the left side of your inner elbow.
Yeah.
It's wild. We should repost that so that people can figure out if they also have that.
I should ask our other people that I know born in the 90s.
Also, is it applicable to other people born in the 80s? Check your elbows.
Yeah.
Are they there? Do you have a freckle? I need to know.
Mom? Dad?
That's the only people. These are the only people we know, guys. We know mom and dad. That's it. End of the list.
And they can be your mom and dad, too.
For the low, low price of $19.99.
I got a mother for sale.
25 cents.
We'll keep our dad, though.
Oh, will we? Well, he has the DVC points.
Yes. And that's what matters, Mom.
Sorry, Mom.
You're going to buy us some more DVC points.
It depends on how much we sell her for. 25 cents is not going to get us very far.
No. What do you think she's worth?
Our mom is like one of the first people that listens to these episodes every week. So, sorry, Mom.
She's a big supporter.
She's
of her
big
very
supporter.
two talented, beautiful, thriving other words. Daughters.
You forgot the word daughters?
No, I was trying to think of other descriptors and I ran out of them.
Brie has a limited number of adjectives in her brain. That was it. That was all of them.
Beautiful, talented, and the list ends.
Oh, wow. Hurtful. We could have been smart. We could have been so many
talented.
things.
That encompasses
Talented
many
doesn't
things.
encompass smart.
Yeah, it does.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, it does.
No, it
You're
doesn't.
talented in smartness.
What? That statement does not really back itself up.
But we're beautiful.
That we are.
And that encompasses a lot.
Speaking of beauty.
Oh.
What a great transition. Brie and I have discovered that we are eerily the same person. There are times where I think we're very different because personality-wise, Brie will open the window of the car and sing at the top of her lungs at passersby. And I'm like melting into the seat next to her.
You're like, hide me.
So there's those moments. But then like a huge percentage of the time, she'll say the thing that's in my head. And I'll say the thing that's in her head. Or we just say it at the exact same moment.
And it's like weird things.
Yeah.
It's not common things.
Really obscure stuff.
We're always thinking the same exact.
It's really frightening. I think maybe people should check on us. But maybe we're okay.
We just have morphed into the same person.
It's very possible. You don't have curly hair yet, though. Gotta work on that.
Technically, I do.
Okay,
I
but
just avoid it.
Stop avoiding
I
it.
identify as not having curly hair.
It's not really working for you.
It's really actually damaging my hair at this point.
Don't worry, I'll take you in. I'll get you a whole routine. It'll be great.
I don't want the routine.
The people out there with the curly hair, they want you to have the routine.
No.
They do.
They're like, I understand. It's a lot. Peace be with you.
All right, we gotta get to a point at some point.
So, Bathsheba.
So, if you did not listen to last week's, we started a series on Bathsheba. We're gonna do 3, possibly 4 episodes. We've actually been talking a little bit about what we want to go into, and it's kind of extensive.
Mm-hmm.
So we may extend this out I don't know, it's our podcast. We'll do what we want.
It's our podcast and not yours. But should we come up with a nickname for Bathsheba? Because Bathsheba is a mouthful.
It is a long name to pronounce.
I'm thinking Babs.
Oh, okay, sure. That feels respectful.
It's different than what I call the dog.
Bebs. So last week we kind of went through the actual biblical story.
Mm-hmm.
So if you didn't listen to that, you might want to actually go back to that one, listen to that one first, and then come to this one. Because it'll help inform what we're talking about this week.
If you want to spend about 2 hours with us, then you can go back.
We're a super amazing time. I think that sounds like a great way to kill a Saturday morning.
We have looked at some of our statistics, and some people are doing that.
Yeah. There have been some people, like 7 straight episodes in a row. And I'm like, whoa, that's a lot of me. That's a lot of Brie.
That's a lot of me.
But if you're having a good time, make sure you have a mimosa along with it, because that sounds even better.
Yeah. I bet we're way more interesting with a mimosa.
Well, I know we are, because I've had a mimosa while being with you, and it is more interesting.
We need to get back on topic. Let's talk about Babs.
All right, Babs. So this week we're going to talk a little bit more about the research behind the topic and people who are smarter than we are, frankly.
Most people.
That's
true.
One of the articles we're going to focus on, there's a few we're going to talk through, but one of them is from our good friend Mark.
Our good friend Mark.
And
different than our best friend Beth.
Different than that, yes. So our good friend Mark. She is incredible. We've talked about her before. She is the title of her blog includes her name and then exploring the biblical theology of Christian egalitarianism.
And I'm assuming you pronounce her last name Mouskowitz.
That's not it. She actually, I discovered that she has an about section and it does have the pronunciation of her name. But I'm not going to try it because I don't want to. Does she have
a son named Fievel?
I don't think so.
Is he a little mouse?
I don't think so.
Was Fievel a mouse?
Fievel was a mouse.
Okay, good. Just checking.
So the article that we're going to talk about first is called A Sympathetic Look at Bathsheba. And we talked a little bit last week about the perceptions around this story, around who Bathsheba was, and why she got this really horrible reputation.
Mm-hmm. Because it's really not written into the Bible in any version.
Nope. Like I said last week, I read through 4 different versions of this story, and it's a hard story in and of itself, so reading through 4 versions is tough. But I really wanted to get an overview of the newer versions of the Bible, some of the older versions of the Bible. I read it in the ESV, the KJV, the NIV, and the Message. And if those are very confusing acronyms for you, they're all just different versions of the Bible. Most of them are translations.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to learn more about those things, I recommend researching the purposes behind why they were written, and
we could do a whole episode on that.
We really should. But anyway, we're going to look at this article right here. I've got it pulled up. And one of the things that stood out to me, I'm not going to read through her whole article because it is intense.
It's extensive, but she's a scholar.
It's just so incredibly smart. But one of the great things is that she references every Bible verse that she talks about, every research piece that she's looking at. So if you want to check her out, would highly recommend that, reading this article yourself. So one of the first things that she talks about is whether or not Bathsheba was naked.
Love that. Because when you picture, if you know the story of Bathsheba, most people are picturing her on her own rooftop, in a bath, naked.
Fully nude.
On purpose, seducing David.
Like, standing there posing. Oh, I'm seductively washing my body.
Where's my Dove soap? Oops, I dropped it.
But what Mark talks about is super interesting to me. So, kind of just the backstory of just this little bit of the story is that King David, who is the king of Israel at the time, goes onto his roof in the middle of the day at one point when he's not supposed to be home. He's supposed to be at war. And looks out on the expanse and sees Bathsheba, who we don't know that he knew prior to this moment, but he sees her and she's bathing and he finds her very attractive. So that's the beginning of the story.
He goes, bow, chicka, wow, wow.
I mean, really, he does.
Yeah.
And so the assumption has been, A, that she's on her roof. B, that she's fully naked. Now, the on her roof thing, I'm not exactly sure where that came from.
I think we're getting it confused just as a people because he was on his roof.
For sure.
But it just says she was within her home.
As Marg says, at the time, women didn't have the luxury of a private bathroom in their home. That was not a thing.
It wasn't a thing for a long time.
Right.
I'm thinking Pride and Prejudice. They just hauled a bathtub into the bedroom.
So you've got to think everyone, men, women, children, are bathing semi-publicly. Not like out in the open, but like potentially with an open window in some space or in their courtyard or something along those lines, with the expectation that like, oh hey, no peeping Toms are going to be on their rooftops staring down at me. Fair assumption.
I would hope that most people out there are showering thinking there's no peeping Toms.
Unfortunately for Bathsheba, that was not true. So we assume that she's on her roof. That's not biblical. It's not what the Bible says. It is in all kinds of resources. Like, there are tons and tons of resources saying she was on her roof. I've heard countless sermons saying she was on her roof. And again, the implication is always she's doing this on purpose.
Correct.
She's purposely on her roof.
Shame on her.
Now, the reality is that, and we talked about this last week, David shouldn't have been home. So even if she was purposely on her roof, why would she have been purposely on her roof when David wasn't supposed to be home? If she was trying to seduce the king, if that was her goal. So then let's talk about the nakedness aspect.
Oh, the nakedness of me.
I think here in 2024, where we sit, we like to take our culture and push it all the way back.
Yeah.
And to us, of course you bathe naked.
Unless, wasn't it Ross from Friends who's like, never nude? Or was that just something
that was on, what was that show that Netflix brought back?
I just remember quoting that with my friends in high school.
Arrested Development.
Was it that?
It was
Never
Arrested
Nude.
Development. Yeah, it was like a club. It was like the Never Nude Club. Yeah, so unless you're those people. But like for the most part, we are showering and bathing naked. Because we have complete privacy. Again, for the most part. I don't know your situation, but...
And also, you can get in all your cracks and your crevices.
Thank you for
better if you're nude.
And so we assume that would have been the case all throughout history and time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now this is not proven one way or the other, but as Mark points out, culturally, you would not have necessarily been naked when you were bathing because you didn't have an expectation of complete and total privacy.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a fully large possibility that she wasn't naked at all. She wasn't on her roof and she wasn't naked.
And that culture was pretty concerned with... Now, this is just my thought.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that they were pretty concerned with modesty, specifically for women at that point in time. So it would be a little odd.
Yeah, for her to be fully naked. Nude. Yeah, and so that could have meant, you know, as I'm washing this part of my body, I'm covering up this part of my body, as, you know, whatever. Mm-hmm. So she probably would have been less covered than normal. Like, she wasn't in full robes. Again, expectation of privacy.
Mm-hmm.
Expectation of privacy, guys. Like, she had a reasonable reason to assume nobody was going to see her. Mm-hmm. So then the next thing that's important to talk about in this article, and I'm going to speed through this one a little bit so we can get through some more.
So fast.
Yeah. Like the wind, Bullseye. So the next important aspect of this that we didn't talk about last week is her age.
Mm-hmm.
So at the time, and, you know, culturally it's different now what is acceptable for an age difference.
Mm-hmm. They didn't think like, okay, over 18, you're an adult.
Right. There was definitely girls were getting married in their early to mid-teens was the expectation. And the men were not necessarily that young. They may have been younger, but they probably wouldn't have been that young. At this point, David has many, many wives. Mm-hmm. So we assume he's older. Now, she was able to conceive a child, as we learn later in the story. So she's at least old enough
to have a period.
Right. Mm-hmm. She's gone through puberty. But, I mean, that can happen quite young.
Think about when you started your periods out there, if you're...
Women.
Oh, women. I don't know if it's... I started when I was 10.
Thank you for that information. You're welcome. People are getting really serious with Brie here.
Listen, that could be a security question. Now you know that about me.
Oh, is that a security question? Feels invasive.
For the woke community.
Yes. Sure. Yeah. And I think, based on what I know of science, that we are starting, like, women are starting their periods younger. So it might have been a little bit older. You could say maybe 13 or something like that. But she was at least that old. Mm-hmm. However, it seems like she was quite young. Mm-hmm. The rest of the accounts, like, not biblical, but other historical accounts of her make her quite young. So we can assume, probably based on the time period, based on the fact that she didn't have any children yet that we know of, that she was probably recently married, and that David was staring at what was likely an underage child and lusting after her. And again, the expectations at the time were different, but still, I think that's an important point to bring up because it humanizes her too. It really helps you see her as the victim in this story.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is what she was.
Right. Not only was she a child, as we've talked about, she was requested by the king. Mm-hmm. For no reason other than sex.
Yep.
And in that scenario, as we learn in other places in the Bible, she didn't have the option to say no.
No.
One of the things that Marg points out later in one of her comments is she talks about Queen Vashti, who was in the story of Esther. So Queen Vashti was the queen prior to Esther. Mm-hmm. And she basically had the guts to say no to a summons from the king. So the king called for her
to do the deed.
Mm-hmm. And she said, "No, thank you. I'm tired of you. Goodbye."
I think you smell. You haven't been showering in the nude like you should have been. And I'm going to keep my knees closed, thank you.
And so what does the king do? He kills her off and he replaces her. And Queen Vashti...
As so many men do.
And Queen Vashti also would have had a lot more confidence and status to be able to say no. And she still got killed.
She was the queen.
Right. So imagine Bathsheba. We some of the comments on this article blow my mind. But some of the comments say, well, she could have said no. She could have said no. And one of the respondents to that was like, only a man would say she could say no.
Mm-hmm.
This girl, she was a child. She was summoned by the king. She had no influence.
She probably had the king's men come to her house and like literally not give her a choice. Pick her up, take her to the king. It wasn't, hey, do you mind? The king actually wanted to see you. Do you mind coming with us? No. It's an order.
Right. Well, the verse says, go get her. He sent them to get her. Not to ask. Not to say, hey, next week are you free?
And this was after he had asked, who is she?
Right.
So he knows. Because she was named, back then they were named by the men that they were related to. So they said, oh, that's the daughter of Eliam, who is one of King David's top 30, like, closest soldiers to him, his top fighters. And also she's the wife of Uriah, who's also in your top 30 soldiers fighting for you, King David. So she's mentioned by 2 of the men that he probably knew.
Yeah, that was actually an error that I want to correct from the last one. We had kind of said that Uriah may not have known David, but as we were researching further, it became clear that Uriah would likely have known David, would likely have been in the palace before, because he was one of David's top guys, which makes the story even worse.
Yeah.
Like, this was someone who had pledged his life to the king and said, I will do anything. I will not question anything that you ask of me.
I will lay down my life.
Which means, if you think about it, now this is also horrific, so don't come at me. But based on the time period, because Uriah had pledged his life and everything to David, if David had said, Uriah, I want your wife, because David does this later.
Yep.
Uriah would have said, probably, okay. You're my king. Okay. Now, still horrific, still forcing himself upon her, still awful, but David could have gotten away with it. But instead, he chose to exert his power over Bathsheba and over Uriah in big ways.
Over many people, yeah. So he knows who she is. He says, I don't care. Go get her. Ridiculous.
Constant, horrible, terrible, awful choices. And we talked about this last week, but you have to think of the timeline too. And I think that's something that we glaze over a lot with this story, because it's only like 2 chapters long. And so it seems like, okay, all of this was done in a period of a week or 2 weeks, or you know, it's easy to make that assumption. The VeggieTales certainly do. The Ducky story is not very long. It's a half hour.
I think we talked about this in the last episode too. Like, think about the entire length of her pregnancy, because spoiler alert, I know that you probably listened to the last episode, she gets pregnant. That's like 9 months of time. So at the end of this story, Nathan the prophet comes to King David and says, like, hey, I know what you did. I know what you did last summer.
And we don't know that happened right after the baby was born.
Yeah.
So it could have been 9 months. It could have been 4 years. You know, like, we really don't have a timeline here. And so to think that David was just chilling, not really seemingly feeling all that bad about this, not telling anybody, and just going on with his life.
Because who was he answering to?
Well, he was supposed to be answering to God.
Supposed to be, but clearly not.
Clearly not. Until Nathan shows up and says, like, hey, God's pissed.
Yeah. He's pissed.
So then the last point I kind of want to make from this article before we move on to a couple of the other ones is how innocent the Bible portrays Bathsheba. And how did we get here? How did we get here?
There's no verse that says, and she seductively tempted him, and shame on her, and shame on Bathsheba. Nathan didn't come and say, hey, Bathsheba, repent. No. He said, David, repent.
And there is another instance later in the story of Bathsheba where Nathan does come to her and talk to her. Not about this, not to make her feel bad, but like as a prophecy from God, he comes to her. And that's a whole different story. Clearly, he has full ability and willingness to talk to her, but he doesn't. He talks to David. And the story that he tells David is about this shepherd who has one little lamb. And the lamb, anytime a lamb is mentioned in the Bible, it's usually like this vision of innocence, of a representation of Christ. So innocence, perfection, whatever you want to, sinlessness, right? And the shepherd has the little ewe lamb, and the rich man takes the lamb and kills it and whatever. If you watched if you listen to the last episode.
Did you watch it too?
If you did, I'm frightened, because where did you watch it from? But in that story, some scholars have implied that if Bathsheba in this case is the lamb, as it seems to be, then it is directly saying in this instance she is sinless.
She is innocent, yeah.
She has done nothing wrong. She was the victim here.
But yet, in so many circumstances, when you hear this story preached, or like we were talking about earlier, like the depictions, the art of this story, it always makes her seem like a villain. Like she was purposely out to get him. And I also want to say, even if she was standing on her roof, butt naked, trying to seduce the king should have said no. The king should have looked at her, okay, and then he asked, who is she related to? Oh, she's the wife of this and the daughter of this. Should have been like, see you, bye. Even if she was trying to seduce him.
Well, I think the reason we forget that is because, as Brie and I were talking about earlier, it is in Christianity always on women to stop men from behaving poorly, to stop men from going after them sexually, to stop men from whatever their urges might be.
Yeah.
It's always on the women. You have to dress a certain way so they don't look at you that way. You have to behave a certain way so they don't think like that. If you get into a situation where he's forcing himself upon you, it's on you to say no, which, like, of course you want to say no anyway, but he has no responsibility in the matter. And I think we put that on this story too.
Yeah. We were talking about this earlier too, like if you had the experience of going to like church camps, or we went to band camp too, and they would yell at us for if our bra straps were showing or our shorts were too short, and say like, hey, you can't wear that because the boys are going to lust after you. Right. And you don't want to cause them to do that. So you have to change yourself because you're worth less than what they are. Their thoughts and just them being men, they are worth more. So you have to put yourself down.
Well, we say this all the time. I couldn't tell you how many times I've heard this. Boys mature slower than girls. Yeah. Boys just, they have such a sexual drive. They have that girls just won't understand. They just can't control that. So it's up to you to help them, to be their sister in Christ. The amount of eye rolls. Like, it's up to you to stop them from sinning. And I just want to point out that even when the Bible calls us the body of Christ, it is never on one person to stop another person from sinning.
Because God gave us free will.
Right. That is never asked of us. It's never asked of me to stop Brianna from sinning.
Nope.
And when it talks, people are always like, well, you don't want to be a stumbling block. Oh, sorry. These are very churchy terms that, like, I've heard.
Well, it's just frustrating because it's like, oh, we need to help them along their way. But at the same time, we're also told that the men need to be the head of the household and the head of this and the head of that, and they need to lead their wives. But also they can't control themselves enough to not take advantage of someone.
Well, and I think that's exactly what's happened in this story is we've taken that mindset, that way of thinking, and thrown it on David and said, well, he couldn't control himself. He saw a naked woman. Therefore, automatically, he must have her. Like, how absolutely stupid. You're right. If she was standing on her roof naked, shouting at him, "Come sleep with me. I'm desperate."
My husband's been away for too long.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because he's still in control of who he is. And he's supposed to be following God. He is directly supposed to be following God. And that's always, always going to be on him. And side note, she wasn't doing any of those things.
Yeah, no.
None of that is true.
Even worse, because she was completely innocent.
But we've made her into this awful person, this villain, this, I don't know, temptress, I guess is a great word.
I think she's just become like a sex object to people, because you were talking about art that you've seen, right?
Yeah, so I looked up a couple of different depictions. So there's a Rembrandt, and I'm looking at it now, unfortunately, but you can't. You could, I suppose.
Everybody get on Google with me. It's time for Art History 101.
Maybe don't. But it's called Bathsheba at Her Bath. And it's a very nude picture. If you're not familiar with this period of art history, there's a lot of nudes, but this one is quite nude. And she's bathing, and, you know, she's got her hand laid just so, like, the suggestive, like, and she's,
come hither.
Her face is innocently off to the side as she tries to seduce him, whatever.
She butter her eyes like this.
But there are many depictions of her, and she's always naked. She's just absolutely always fully nude. And I hate that for her. Now, I know she's been gone for a long time, but just empathetically, imagine if your history, and she has a great story from here. This part of her story is horrific, don't get me wrong, but from here, she has a lovely rest of her story. And this is what she's known in history for. Not the fact that she raised King Solomon, not the fact that she
was the queen mother.
Yeah, and would later have so much influence and be risen by God to such a position that, I mean, you could argue that she was on equal footing as King David was at the time.
She was part of Jesus's bloodline.
Yeah, absolutely. She has an incredible rest of her story, and yet, as a society, we remember her as the naked girl. How awful.
Because I feel like society just, it's easy. And like we said in the last episode, we like to make a lot of excuses for people in power in order for them to keep their power. This is another excuse.
Right. Well, and I think it makes us uncomfy to say the reality of who David was, because he is, and it's actually prior to this story, called a man after God's own heart. And that's an interesting phrase. So Marg actually talks about that as well. So I would recommend checking out her work on that. But it makes us uncomfortable to call him out for what he was. And I can't say, again, the exact word here because algorithms, but the fact that he forced himself on her, the fact that he murdered her husband. Can I say murder? Should I say unalive? He unalived her husband? That's a really tough set of things to try and put together. Man after God's own heart, but also this horrific person. Like, how do you reconcile those? And I think that's why we've done this to her.
I think that kind of leads us into some like current events happening in our life right now.
Yeah.
There's a story going around where someone high up in a position of power in a very well-known church.
There's a church that we have been associated with, and there's a huge scandal going on right now. And it's because someone in power decided that they were the most important person. He decided that he was more important than all of the people that he was supposed to be serving. That his needs were more important.
And that the consent of other people was not worth his time.
Right. And we are really struggling with that right now. As the two of us, as my husband, like it's something that has become very real to us as we look at this story as well.
Yeah, I think it relates to this story because he was someone that people wanted to look up to, right? He's someone that a lot of people are still, in some ways, defending
Mm-hmm.
because it makes them uncomfortable
Mm-hmm.
to sit with that reality. Like,
Yeah.
that someone in the faith is not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's okay to say what they did was really wrong.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what I've seen also in this story, and I think relates to David and Bathsheba as well, is watching people say, like, post on social media, like, well, whoever's without sin cast the first stone, and we have to forgive and forget, and we have to whatever, and I hear that to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
We are certainly called to forgive. However, we are also called to call out sin, and we are also called to be there for the people who are hurting. And what doesn't help in those situations is to say, hey, you got to forgive. Hey, you got to forgive.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I forgave, so you got to forgive. Hey, forgive. God said forgive.
Because you have to think about the people that were affected.
Right.
And validate that what happened to them is not right.
Mm-hmm.
And we're there for you.
And remember that forgiveness is not something that God said, force this upon others.
Right.
Forgiveness is something that happens for you to help you in a situation. Mm-hmm. Whenever the other person, should they choose to forgive, that's between them and God.
Mm-hmm.
And when you post things, when you say things like forgive, 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 or when you say it about King David in this story, forgive, 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 what you do is invalidate all of what the victim went through, when what you could say instead is, I'm so sorry.
That was completely not okay. I am so sorry.
Mm-hmm. And that's it. That's the end of the sentence.
Mm-hmm.
If from there they need you and they need help, then be there, step in, whatever.
Or they come to you and say, I want to forgive, but I'm struggling.
Mm-hmm.
Help me. Like, absolutely.
Yeah. But it can just be, I'm so sorry.
And I think we've talked about this before, but we are always so quick as a, like, Christian community to defend the church.
Mm-hmm.
At all costs,
Mm-hmm.
defend the church. But the church is the people.
Right.
So are you defending the people?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you defending the institution?
Mm-hmm. And if your immediate reaction to situations like what we're going through right now, to if you know someone that's been in a situation like Bathsheba found herself in, if your immediate reaction is defend the church, defend the church, defend the church, and I have been on the receiving end of this.
Yeah.
If your immediate reaction is that, what you're doing is telling that person, you don't have a place here anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We don't actually care about you.
We will say until the bitter end that we care about you, but our actions are not loving or caring.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a huge part of, and I've seen this again through this story on social media as people comment and say, this is why I'm not in church. I will never go back to church because of things like this. We were thinking about going back to church and now we won't, etc., etc. And then you see people comment back who are church people in full defense of the church person. That's never going to bring anybody to church.
How much more is it going to bring someone back if someone commented from that church and they were like, I am so incredibly sorry that you feel that way. I hear you.
Mm-hmm. And that's it, guys.
And
that's it. Because I think we'll always say, like, as a church, we want to be known for fill in the blank, for our love of people, for our forgiveness, for our whatever, supernatural forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I hear you. But what people are going to see from the outside isn't they forcibly made everybody forgive this person and put on a smiley face.
Yeah.
What they're going to see is, in this space, supported and loved and admitted to what was going on. That's what gets seen from the outside, if you do it right, which we'll see. But that's what the church should be known for, their care and love of their people. And when forgiveness does come from that, in the end, it's on each individual person. And they can handle that themselves.
Because who are you trying to protect?
Mm-hmm.
Are you trying to protect Bathsheba? Or are you trying to protect David?
Right. I think most of the time we're trying to protect David, unfortunately. Yeah. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about, so I looked up this story just on Wikipedia. Okay, this is the most basic internet search. I found lots of articles, but I thought the one on Wikipedia was really interesting because it breaks it down into this story from the perspective of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So in my mind, like, this story is only coming from one perspective, but the reality is that this is a historical story that was in other historical accounts. So Christians, I hate to tell you this, we don't have like a monopoly on this story. And I'm not going to go through like the whole really deep part of it because in Judaism there's like a lot to it. It goes into astrology, so we're full circling.
I'm a Leo.
Congratulations.
That's another
Brianna.
security question for you.
Great. But I wanted to talk about one important part. So on Wikipedia, it says that according to rabbinic tradition, and if I am saying that incorrectly, I'm sorry.
Most likely you are.
Most likely I am. Later on in the story, Bathsheba's son Solomon, he's not going to be king because he's not the oldest son. So like logically he's not. And his brother, I'm not going to try and say his name, is going to become king. But the prophet Nathan comes to Bathsheba and says, hey, Solomon was supposed to be king. That was foretold to you a long time ago. We talked about this. I want you to go to David and remind him. And so she does. And then Solomon becomes king. Essentially, it implies that she, and Christianity has done this too, through this story, it implies that she was like politically motivated and that then pushes all the way back to when she was a child and she had Solomon in the first place. So this says that according to rabbinic tradition, which I know I said it wrong, when Bathsheba saw that this other son was about to be crowned king, that basically she went to the prophet Nathan and said, hey, we're going to plot together and make it so that Solomon is going to be king. And so it kind of portrays her as like super politically motivated. And I guess then we also are going to push that narrative all the way back to when she was a literal child.
That's quite the plan, I would say, to be like, I'm going to be naked, bathing, hoping that the king who's not supposed to be at his house is going to see me, and then I'm going to make him want to sleep with me, make myself get pregnant, make sure it's a boy, even though he's not going to be the first boy, and I'm going to make that boy a king.
It's the long game. She's playing the long game.
Keep in mind, she's 13 and stupid. As all 13-year-olds are.
I mean, it's a rough time when you're 13. But yeah, I mean, the story, it falls apart real quick when you start trying to tell that story. According to Wikipedia. Now, if you grew up in the Jewish faith or you are in the Jewish faith and I'm incorrect, please definitely let us know. But that's what it says about the end of her story.
Marg talks about that in her article, too. She says that there's just, when you try to make that argument, it doesn't hold up. Because the only reason that she went to the king to remind him that Solomon was supposed to be the king was because Nathan came and reminded her.
Right.
It wasn't something that she was like, ha ha ha.
Right. She was, I mean,
she was good.
As far as the Bible says, she was fully going to accept that this was what was going on. This was the new king, such is life, moving on. So then we've already talked about like the Christian viewpoint of her, and then we'll talk just for a second about, because Wikipedia talks about it and I think it's interesting, the Islamic view of her. So it says, in Islam, David is considered to be a prophet. And some tradition views this story as incompatible with that because if he's a prophet, he can't sin.
Oh, that's nice for him.
Especially him.
Like, I didn't know that was an option.
There's a lot of sin in David's story, like a bunch. So that's going to be a hard one to argue. But it has a quote here that says, whoever says that David has married Uriah's wife, as the legends are narrate, I will punish him twice. One for, a word I can't pronounce, falsely accusing someone of adultery, and the other for desecrating the prophethood, defamation of the prophet David. So basically they're saying that this story could not have ever happened in the way that the Bible says it. Now, obviously there's different sacred texts and things like that. But this argument is saying that this could not have been the truth. Whereas Christianity would say everything in the Bible is true.
And everybody has sin except for God.
Right. So different religious traditions, but I just found that really interesting. If you want to see those, like I said, it's the Wikipedia page just on Bathsheba. So you can go check that out. We also looked her up on the Jewish Women's Archive, which...
one of our favorites.
It is. There's so many good resources out there that I didn't know existed. And that's why I like to name them as we use them so that you guys can then go and utilize that as well.
Did you see the comment on our TikTok the other day?
Yeah, so there was a comment. It made me really happy. I think she said, "I'm home" or something.
She said, wait, faith and feminism? I'm home or something like that. I loved it.
It was, I think I always check our TikTok when I get up in the morning. And it was like the first thing that I saw. And it just made me feel happy, and it was really nice. So if you're out there listening to the actual podcast, we're so happy you're here.
Because there's not an abundance of resources out there with dealing with this topic, faith and feminism.
Right.
And it is a thing. Like we've said before, Jesus was a feminist.
Well, and for us too, we love to see your guys' comments. It's not always easy to do a podcast because this is a lot of work. We spend a lot of our time that we don't have a ton of anyway.
Yeah.
Podcasting and editing and getting the clips up and things like that.
Plus also we spend at least 12 hours a day sleeping.
It's a lot of work.
I need at least 13 hours.
So it was just really nice to know that we can be part of creating that community for someone. And hopefully we can also, I don't know, push you all forth into some really good resources as well. I don't know how to say that without sounding weird.
Go forth and read.
Read these research papers. Have a great time. Anyone want to feel like they're in school?
But, just because our best friend is Beth and our good friend is Marg, doesn't mean they can't be your best friends and good friends.
Very true, very true. Although we haven't asked them, so we don't know them.
They don't need to know. And in fact, if I were to meet them and they were to have listened to this, I think I would be embarrassed.
That's fair. But they might also love us. No way to know.
No. Unless, hey, Beth, Mark, Sarah Bessie, all of the people that we know. If you'd like to question, comment, concern our podcast, reach out. We'd be open to a brunch, a mimosa.
We do love a mimosa. So anyway, next week. Next week.
The future.
The future.
As we look ahead.
We're going to be talking about this story again because I just feel like there's so much to it, and her story continues on from here in the Bible. And a lot of times women's stories in the Bible, they do seem very short. They're, one chapter, or even like the book of Esther is very short.
Yeah.
So it feels like their stories are so short, but with Bathsheba, like we do follow her along for a while.
Yeah.
She's in the lineage of Jesus, like we talked about. She has Solomon as one of her children.
Mark has another article that I read on kind of the continuation of Bathsheba's story that I find really interesting.
So we're going to talk about that. I would also like to talk about some of the. I'm gonna find some really painful quotes. So prepare yourselves from pastors that have preached on this.
Oh.
So we're going to talk about that. This might be a 3-parter. It might be a 4-parter. We'll see. It depends on how we're feeling that day.
It just depends on how chatty we're feeling and how alive this makes us feel.
It's the alive part that's always a concern. So you guys can look forward to that fun next week. It's going to be thrilling.
Shout out to, where do we want to send people to listen to us?
Send them to listen to us? All right. We need you all a road trip too.
Honestly. We're willing to do that too.
All right. Let's see. Brie, are there any other states that you don't think exist?
I'm convinced that Utah is a state.
Well, that's good. Would you like people to listen from Utah?
I don't know.
All right, those of you in Utah, convince Brie that you listen to podcasts. She does believe you're real, so hooray.
What do you call people from Utah? Utahians?
I don't know. What do you call us?
Michiganders.
That's weird.
No, but that's really what we're called.
I know, but it's weird.
Utahians.
Yeah,
Utahians.
All right, people from Utah, I'm sorry. But also, if you could listen to the podcast, that'd be great. Also, you guys can like, comment, share, all the things. You can follow us on social media. We are heavily on TikTok and Instagram. You can find us on Facebook, but I'm kind of lazy about that.
Did I say before that I think it's a dead art?
You did. You did.
I stand by that.
So, people of Facebook.
People of Facebook, you need to find a new social media platform.
I'm on Facebook a lot, actually. I don't know why. It's kind of useless.
Okay,
No, I'm with you.
See, I do scroll through Facebook like in the morning as I'm like the wee early bits of the morning I'm trying to crust my eyes. And I just, out of habit, go to Facebook and start scrolling, and I realize it's nothing but ads and garbage.
It is. It really is.
So,
there are a few people that I like to follow on there. We follow Sheila on there. I do
also.
I like to see her stuff. There's a few people that I like on there. But anyway, so go check us out on socials. We will see you next week.
Peace be with you.
And also with you. And love you. Goodbye.